So good afternoon, my name is David. I'm going to try something a little bit different today. Normally when I film these videos, when I'm doing crafts, I'm listening to music. I love having music playing in the background when I'm baking, when I'm working in the shop, when I'm doing jewelry, whatever it is. So normally I just cut out all the sound of the video, and oftentimes I'll speed up the video so it doesn't matter. But I'm going to try a little different today and try to narrate what I'm doing, because that's one of the comments that I've gotten is it looks like you're saying something or you're doing something, but I don't know what you're doing. So that's what I'm going to do today. And today's video, today's project is actually going to be making some bread pudding. Now, I make awesome bread pudding. Not to toot my own horn, but everybody that's had it has enjoyed it. And if you don't like bread pudding, well, you're wrong. Simple as that. No, seriously, I've had people say, I don't like bread pudding, oh, it's nasty, it's gross. And I ask them how they've had it before. Normally, they get it at a restaurant, or some family member made it when they were a kid or something like that. With that said, I use a recipe. I actually have a couple recipes that have been passed down. And one of those recipes that I use is older than I am. And the other thing with the recipes is I never make it exactly the same twice, because one of the things that I do is experiment when I'm doing something, and that's what I'm going to do today. So that's how much I love baking and doing stuff like this, is that I was driving down the road at work, I was thinking about making bread pudding for the get-together that I'm going to tomorrow, and I initially thought hey, I'm going to make some bread pudding, I'm going to throw some apples in it, I'm going to make apple bread pudding, maybe do an apple compote. But then I thought, why don't I take the apples that are going in the apple bread pudding and toss them in a little bit of cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, sugar, so it's kind of got that apple pie flavoring, so make some apple pie bread pudding. Now this is, like I said, I love experimenting and doing things. So what you're going to see today is me figuring this out as I go along, and I'll try to talk through that. So enough of the introduction. You see behind me I've still got the canning stuff that I did just the other day. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab the boxes and put those jars of apple butters up out of the way so I can clean out this area. This is where I'm going to be doing most of the bread pudding, because the bread pudding, well, I'll get to that in a minute. So just stand by. So I got my working corner cleaned out. And like I said, the apple butter recipe, excuse me, apple butter, got apple butter on the bread. The bread pudding recipes that I use, I actually have one sitting right here. You can see it on the cabinet. This thing has lived here, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now, since I started making the bread pudding and got the recipe from my mom. And if you went by this recipe, you would have okay bread pudding, but I've tweaked the recipe. I actually have a recipe written down in a book, notebook that I use to keep track of everything. That's a little bit differently. I just have this one up here in case I need to feel like making something quick and easy. And it's a good starting point. Okay. What I'm going to do is just start prepping all the ingredients. These are some apples that I canned last year, and finally getting around to having a reason to use them. So, like I said, we're going to make a couple batches. We'll make a straight, plain bread pudding. I'm going to make an apple bread pudding where I just fold the apples into the bread pudding mix, and then I'm going to make the apple pie bread pudding where I actually toss these apple slices in that sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg mix. So part of my process is just making sure I got all the things that I need. I had to run up to the store and get some more eggs. I only had 5 left. Like I said, this bread pudding recipe stays here, it lives here, and it's a good starting point. Just to give you an idea, it's 3 eggs, 1½ cup of sugar, 2 tablespoons of light brown sugar, ½ teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 cup of melted butter, 3 cups milk, 10 slices of farm style bread, toasted and cubed, and then 1 cup raisins. let me just say, if you put raisins in your bread pudding, you're the devil. That's probably why people don't like your bread pudding, is because there's raisins in it. Alright, back to the important stuff. I got some butter sitting out on the counter to get nice and warm. As like it says, it's a 1/4 cup of butter that we're going to melt, and as we all know, a 1/4 cup is half a stick. Sugar, we got the light brown sugar. I think I need to pick with another pack of light brown sugar. That's going to get us a little bit. So I'm probably going to need to get another pack of that. Like I said, I've got the milk, the eggs. I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, divide out some of this milk so hopefully it'll reach room temperature a little faster. One of the things I'm going to say is that the bread pudding recipe calls for 3 eggs. I never use 3 eggs. I always use 5 eggs. Like I said, I don't follow these directions. I know how I'm going to tweak it based on what I've been making for the last several years. And one of the things that I've found is that 5 eggs is better than 3. One of the other things that I like to do is, like I said, I want my milk getting to room temperature because it's actually going to go in the pan and get warmed up. The old recipe I have calls for scalded butter. Willing to bet the reason that it calls for scalded milk is because the recipe is so old, and back then they didn't have pasteurized, homogenized milk that we have today. So that was partly to help cook the milk, and when you cook the milk, it makes it a little bit sweeter. So I went ahead and poured 3 cups into my saucepan, since that's what I'm going to be bringing it up to about 110, 115 degrees. Not quite a simmer. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and throw the butter in there. So we're melting the butter, scalding the milk. And you know what I forgot to do? Got to get my thingy on. And by thingy I meant apron. Got to get my apron on. Right, low, even lower if you're on a gas stove, because you just want this to warm up slowly. It's milk, you don't want to curdle it. Behind the camera, gathering some more of my ingredients: cinnamon, nutmeg, salt. What else do we need? There's some clove. And that should be where we're at. Need the bread. Alright, so if you're like me and you love bread, but you don't always get around to eating as fast as you make it, or you buy fresh bread from the store and it goes bad, what I do if bread is starting to go bad, I go ahead and toast it in the oven so I can dry it out. So what I've got here are some various dried out bread, and I just cut it, pop it in the oven about 200 degrees for an hour or 2 hours until it's nice and dry. Some regular sandwich bread that I got from the store that I just didn't get around to eating. I think this, so I dried it out before it went bad. Stick it in a Ziploc, and that way it's ready to go when I need it for some bread pudding. Okay, I got 3 sets of 5 eggs, 15 eggs, so it's going to be 3 batches. That's another 3 cups. That's 3 cups. Quarter cup of butter. So when I'm baking, I'm kind of switching around from task to task as I feel is necessary, or depending on where I'm at in the process. Getting all the stuff together, obviously important. Prepping the baking dishes so they're ready for you, so they're ready for your use. Is important also. So having this milk on nice low heat, allowing the milk to become scalded, gives me time to do the other things, such as get out my baking dishes. I already know I'm going to make 3 batches, so I'm going to need several buttered dishes, and I know on average I can make 1 batch. I can get 2 of these glass bread bowls, or glass bread dishes, whatever you want to call them, out of it. I know if I go a little bit easier on the bread, I can get 1 this size. And you're probably going to see as I go, I vary from the directions, and I don't really have a good way to tell you how much bread is going in there. I guess I could weigh it, but it's always such a different size, shape of bread. I can't say like this recipe does, 10 slices farm style bread, toasted and cubed. I have no idea how big of slice is farm style. And I'm using baguettes, I'm using hamburger or hot dog buns, and I'm using sandwich bread. So there's no good way for me to do it, so I do it by feel and how it looks. Alright, so that's going. It's not quite there yet, but we do want to get out our sugar because it's going to go in there as well. So our recipe calls for 1.5 cup sugar, which that sounds like a good idea to me. So 1/2 cup. Half cup. And another 1/2 cup makes 1.5 cups. What I also need is 2 tablespoons of light brown sugar. And anytime a recipe calls for brown sugar, whether it's light or brown, make sure you pack it. You want packed brown sugar, and then that just gives you a good smooth measurement. I always crumble it back up before it goes into whatever it's going in. Alright, so we got our sugar in there. Give it a good stir, let it keep going. So as an aside, you don't have to heat this. You don't have to put the butter in there when it's warm. You can just melt the butter separately. You can add it to the cold milk. You can add sugar to the cold milk and mix it up. Like I said, I do it this way, and it seems to make really good bread pudding. So I'm going to stick with what I know. Now, we also have our spices, salt, sugar, salt, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves that need to go in this mix, along with our eggs and some vanilla. They're not going to go in while it's cooking. I'm going to let it cool down because I don't want the spices to cook. I want them cooking in the oven. You know, that probably doesn't even make any sense. But it's just how I do it. That actually looks good. So that's all nice and melted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer it to my mixing bowl. It's about 126 degrees, so it's not crazy hot, so it's not going to matter. But I want it to start cooling down. So it's going in the mixing bowl. I can go ahead and get the second batch going of milk and butter. And then I got one more batch to go. Alright. So one more batch. Didn't quite kill off a gallon, but close enough. We're going to let that milk cook. We got the butter in there. This butter in there. I got a stick and a half. We're going to get this in the fridge. Alright, when I'm making the bread pudding, I get a good butter coating on the dishes that it's going to go in. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've got these 3 glass. Another thing that I do is I've never cooked bread pudding in anything but a glass dish. I'm guessing you can cook it in a regular bread pan. But for me, it always gets cooked in these dishes. And I know I'm gonna need another dish, but I'm not sure which one I'm gonna use yet. That's why I haven't gotten it out. Okay, that's nice and messy butter. Over here in our butter dish. And I don't think I've ever found a way not to get butter all over my hands while I'm coating these dishes in butter. Because you want to make sure you get it on every surface pretty good. And it's real easy to tell with these glass ones. And if you guys can see, but you can see where the butter is and where the butter isn't really nicely. I'm going to actually set these out of the way. Again, you can see where the butter's at, where it's not. So it makes, maybe that's why I like using these, because it's real easy to see on these. Plus it gives it that nice loaf shape, which makes it easy to slice for your guests. Alright, we got some dishes buttered. We've got one batch of milk cooling down. We got the other batch heating up. And like I said, we're still going to add some things to our bread pudding. This first batch I'm going to make is just going to be the straight bread pudding, nothing added, no fruit, no nuts, just plain bread pudding. I think the second batch is where we're going to get a little creative. What did I do with it? I got my handy dandy little temperature gun. And I want it, like I said, I want it room temperature. Room temperature is one of those subjective things. Right now the room temperature in here is probably 68, 70 degrees. So when anybody says room temperatures, what's it really mean? Seriously. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and crack my eggs. Can y'all see this? I have no idea how this camera's angle is going to work out. Okay, I went ahead and stuck my phone up here so we can get an overhead view of some of the stuff that I'm doing over here if it's even necessary. I'm literally mixing eggs, or beating the eggs, because I want them nice and beat before I put them in the milk mixture. Cup and a half sugar, and then with the tablespoon of brown sugar. So I'm adding the vanilla extract to the egg mix. 2 teaspoons, thereabouts. I'll mix that in real good. So I got half teaspoon of nutmeg going in there. Quarter teaspoon of clove going in there. teaspoon of salt. The cinnamon, we're actually gonna get probably about a tablespoon, and so that's gonna wait to go in the combined mixture. So you might have noticed the bread bowl is off the counter. I went ahead and stuck it in the fridge to see if I could speed up the cooling down process. Alright, this second batch is ready to cool down as well. Then we can get the third batch in there. Problem is I don't have another big mixing bowl like that, so I'll use one of my Pyrex mixing bowls. I'm going to set this second batch out of the way and let it cool down. And we're going to go ahead and get the third. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to prep the apples to make the apple pie bread pudding. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and get me a good sized bowl that I can put the apples in. Excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and get me a good sized bowl that I can put the apples in so that I can toss them in the spices mix. So for the apple pie mix, I want to toss the apples in the same type of composition that would be in a regular apple pie. So that's going to be some clove, some nutmeg, I got some brown sugar in there. We're going to get some cinnamon in there. Butter dish hanging out. And of course we're going to get some sugar in there. And we need a smidge of flour. We get maybe a half a whole teaspoon. Get a teaspoon of flour in there. Alright, so I have a jar of canned apples. Not been opened. You can see the seal's still good on it. But it's sitting on a lot of liquid. I don't need that liquid to go into my bread pudding, so I'm going to separate that out. I'll wipe off the jar. Maybe pop the lid. There it pop the lid. And drain out my apples. Now before I throw the apples in there, I want to give them a good mix. Hold on a second. Stupid. Okay, I was adjusting the camera there. Off. So, like I said, I want to mix this up. And you see, brown sugar loves to clump. We drained our apples. We don't want a lot of that juice getting into the bread pudding. So we're going to throw our apples into the mix. Oops, that's it. That is going to be very apple-y. Alright, so I'm going to have to figure out what to do with this nice apple syrup. Actually, I'm going to taste this nice apple syrup. See how it tastes. Tastes like sugared apple water. Because that's exactly what it is. But this is actually probably going to be the base of the apple compote. I've got 2 more jars of apples to use for that, so that's good. So there is our apples for our apple pie bread pudding. Doesn't that look friggin' delicious? So we're going to set that aside as well because we are nowhere near ready for it. Okay, so we're almost ready for our first batch of bread pudding to go in the oven. I've got the oven on at 350. We're going to cook, what are we going to cook it at? 50 to 55 minutes. Got our first batch of milk mixture chilling in the fridge to help bring down that temperature. Son of a crap. Still 98 degrees. Come on. Alright, so what we got going on here is the first batch of milk is finally cooled down to around 80s, so I'm comfortable going ahead and getting the egg mixture in. So I think I mentioned earlier I was going to make the apple pie bread pudding next, but I'm going to make it with this first batch since I got everything mixed here. Literally just pouring in the egg and spice mixture. Now remember, I still got to add some cinnamon. get that good and mixed. The apples are sitting right here. They're not going in until we actually put the bread portion into the baking dishes. Well, looks like we need to refill our cinnamon bucket. So 1, that's 2, and that's 3, yeah. Lots of cinnamon. Love the cinnamon. Just gotta remember where I put the big bucket of it. Big bucket of cinnamon, so we can restock the dish. I've found using these types of containers for commonly used things in bulk, like the cinnamon and the salt, work really well. Alright, so if we can see that on this phone camera, we're mixing this in. So, one of the things that I tell people who say, like, I don't like bread pudding, I ask them, do you like French toast? And if they say, yeah, I'm saying, oh, then you should like bread pudding because it's pretty much French toast cake. And if they don't like bread pudding, well, they're just wrong. Again. Alright. So now what we got, bread. This looks like some good honey wheat bread. We're going to break these chunks up, drop them down in there. We're going to mix in some white buns, drop them down in there. We're going to mix up some baguettes and drop them down in there. That way we get a nice mixture. So you can see that bread is toasted and dried out to perfection. That way it lasts forever when you're storing it, even in just a Ziploc bag. We're going to work it down into the mixture because I want it to moisten. I want it to soak up all that milk and sugar into the bread. So I mentioned earlier, I don't know how much bread exactly goes into the dish because this is how I do it. I throw some bread in there, I squish it down, I see how it's soaking up that milk mixture. And I don't want over wet bread pudding. I want some nice and moist but firm consistency bread pudding. So I can tell we can squish a little bit more bread into it. And we're not going crazy, we're just squishing a little bit more in at a time. We want this bread to soak in as much of that liquid as we can before we get it into the oven. Just get some more good pieces. So there we go. Just coming over to the oven, see where my temp's at. It's ready at 350. I've got a baking pan, and I forgot to move the rack, so I'm going to move the rack right now. But I'm going to have a baking pan in there to catch any spillover. I did a bread pudding on a middle rack. Where are we at?
You can see how much liquid is sloshing around in there. And I think that is going to be really good. So let's see. Soak it up. You know what? I'm going to just take this. I have the right to change my mind whenever I want. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to get some of these bigger pieces out. Can you see that? I stand on tippy toes looking there. I'm going to lay some of these bigger pieces on the bottom. Create a nice firm base. I just want this complete base covered before I layer in the apples. Good. Alright, so we got our apple mixture right here. It's nice and gooey. So I'm literally layering it in there. That way, every cut will get some of this apple goodness. I've got some really nice juice. That's where all the good flavor is. So I'm just going to try to gently pour it around. Alright, perfect. Alright, we got that layer in. Now you see this is just a nice goopy mess. That's perfect. We're just going to layer it right on top. Because that's going to bake together nicely and just lock everything in. Yeah. Alright, so this extra, we want it wet. Not overly wet. Oh, perfect. Right up to the top. That means it is going to expand. It is going to probably leak over a little bit when it's expanding. But like I said, we put a cookie sheet in there. So that should be good. That's going to be... can't tell. Kind of debating with myself, that might be a little moist. I might throw a piece of bread on top to soak up some of that. You know what? I am going to do that. I'm just going to get this piece of bread right here. I'm going to break it up. I'm going to squish it down in there to see if we can't soak up just a little bit. Just to soak up a little bit more of that fluid. Not really soaking it up, so that's fine. Now, if I was making regular one, I would sprinkle some cinnamon sugar over the top. But we've got plenty of spices in here. This is probably going to be super delicious. I can't wait till it comes out. So I'm actually going to pause this camera so I can take a picture.
so good. All right. So if I can spin this camera around. There you go. Alright, going in the oven. Bam. We're going to set our timer for 50 minutes. Because the time frame is 50 to 55 minutes. We don't want to set it for the max time because we want to check it at the shortest time. Let's see how we're cooked. Spin back around. Line us back up. Alright, so you can see, that's rising up nicely, but the top of the bread pudding is rising up above the sides of the dish, and so it's getting exposed. We don't want it to burn. We want it nice and crisp, but we don't want it to burn, so we're going to get some aluminum foil over top of that.